Cellular stress encompasses all the events ranging from perception of the stress up till mitigation, which may culminate either in adaptation or cell death. So, understanding of cellular stress begins with a basic understanding of homeostasis. So, homeostasis is a tendency of maintaining relatively and nearly stable equilibria between interdependent elements towards a common function. So, in our case, this function is survival. So, if we look at organismal level, in animals, these interdependent elements would include physiological processes such as digestion, excretion, nerve transmission, respiration, etc. And in plants, these interdependent physiological processes would include uptake of solutes in water, its transport through xylem and phloem, photosynthesis, transpiration, etc. And now, if we look at cellular level, then these elements towards homeostasis would include influx and efflux of solutes, maintenance of membrane potential, functionality of enzymes, maintenance of reactive oxygen species level, cellular respiration, etc. So, when all these processes are occurring at a coordinated manner, then the cell would survive and everything will remain in a stable phenomena. And whenever this homeostasis gets disturbed by any environmental factor, that is called stress. Now, this realization of disturbance in homeostasis is the very first step of cellular stress mitigation, and this is known as stimulus perception. So, this change in environmental phenomena towards a cell, this can be considered a signal, and it is received through several structures present in a cell, or such as membrane alterations, metabolite fluctuation, or even through chaperones. In the next step, that signal has to be transmitted from the environment to the cell's interior. So, for this process, the receptor, which can be considered as a primary molecule, that transmits the signal to its secondary molecules lying towards the interior of the cell, and further, that stimulus is transmitted through a range of downstream molecules, and in this process the transmission gets exponentially increased, which is known as signal amplification. From the cell surface, this signal through several metabolites and various biochemical processes is realized by three main cellular compartments, that is mitochondria, chloroplast and endoplasmic reticulum. And after this, the interaction between the cellular organelles and the nucleus begins. After the realization of the stress and signal transmission, the next step, that is generation of responses towards the cellular stress, are initiated. Now these include several downstream processes such as heat shock response, where there are unfolded proteins, and then HSP27 and HSP70 they try refolding the proteins, or there may be DNA damage response, where damaged DNA is either realized through a pause in replication or even other ways by the invigilation machinery, and then DNA is repaired. Or there's another important process called unfolded protein response, which is generally found in ER stress, that activates several transcription factors which work towards gene regulation, and when any of these processes they work successfully, then the survival is ensued. Now, response is not just a single cellular process, it's an entire phenomena that consists of various cellular processes. So, all of these towards a stress should be very well coordinated. They should be mutually responsive, so that if one of the processes is failing or the cell is unable to handle stress at that level, then the second stage responses become activated, and likewise these follow, and they should be occurring continuously so that they can fight the stress, for which of course the maintenance of the metabolites and all other things required for that response, they should be present within the cell. So when these three aspects are covered, then a response is said to be able to mitigate a stress. this competition between the stress and adaptation, it continues. And if a stage comes where the stress is continuous, or the metabolites or the cellular components required for fighting that stress, they start getting exhausted. So we say that the stress is outweighing the adaptive processes of the cell. So at this particular junction, the cell has to decide between the survival pathways or in the cell death initiation. This is followed by either of the two situations. Either the stress is too much for the cell to handle, in which situation there will be accidental cell death and the organism fails to survive, or either the adaptive responses of the cell function so very well that the stress is outweighed and the cell survives, or the cell selectively regulates the death of damaged cells so as to get rid of them and the other cells can survive. In either case, the survival of the organism is given priority.